What unusual times. Farmers across the world are protesting. What are the reasons? What can be the solutions? Is this only politics or economics? Or more intense, a social uprising? Join me in unraveling the farmers' protests, not just in Europe, but also in India. And before you forget, hit that like button, share this episode with your friends and colleagues, and subscribe to my channel. Let us start with protests in Europe. Every country is protesting for different reasons, but there are some common elements, and they are: 1. European Union's laws, 2. Cheaper imports, 3. Low prices for outputs, 4. Subsidy reversals, and 5. Climate change and war. Let us start with EU's laws. What are the problems with them? There is something called as Common Agricultural Policies or CAP. This in a way is problematic. At least I feel so. Because how can the entire continent have the same rules in a subject like agriculture? Every land is different. Every region has a different climate and soil and water requirements. So, just the logic, in my opinion, does not hold strong enough. In industries and services, one can at least try to bring uniformity in different aspects of operations. Agriculture is completely a different ballgame. Centralization, that is, decisions taken in Brussels for the entire European Union, is in a way not a completely correct mechanism. I might be wrong, but these are my initial thoughts. Also, note that I do not belong to any camp of Eurosceptics either. Also, one more disclaimer as we go ahead with the topic is that I'm not in any form aware or knowledgeable enough on the agricultural or business aspects of European continent. In this episode, I will take the help of various sources to form a basic understanding of this issue. CAP was initiated in 1962. The formation was based on three main principles. First, a unified market in which there is a free flow of agricultural commodities with common prices within the EU. Means it does not distinguish a commodity from one EU country with another. Second, product preference in the internal market over foreign imports through common customs tariff. A small part of this was covered in the Brexit episode where we discussed difference between free trade area and a customs union. It means that a country outside of the EU is different from a country within the EU. So the principle means that it will prefer an EU produced good over a non-EU good. Third, financial solidarity through common financing of agricultural programs. To receive financial subsidy, the farmers have to follow some set of rules set by the EU. Now, in the period 2023 to 2027, the CAP is aiming to become greener and environmentally more conscious. One such rule was to devote 4% of arable land for non-productive use. That means 4% of land should be used to plant trees or hedges. It was allowed to keep the land fallow, meaning not plowing at all. Why was that necessary? Because a lot of greenhouse gas emissions occur due to agriculture through the use of pesticides and fertilizers. Currently, the farming sector accounts for 11% of EU's greenhouse gas emissions. So, keeping some land for such purposes will reduce the emissions. After protest, this rule has been now relaxed. Also, the rule stated that the farmers should carry out crop rotations and reduce fertilizer use by at least 20%. These rules impact the yield directly. Farm output will be lesser and thus there is a loss to farmers. And that's why they are protesting. Next reason is cheaper imports. You would have heard one of the main principles, which is product preference in the internal market through common customs tariffs. But the Russia-Ukraine war changed everything. European Commission made all Ukrainian imports into the EU free of duties until at least June 2025. Agricultural imports from Ukraine jumped from 7 billion euros to 13 billion euros in 2022. It has increased the overall supply and has reduced the prices because basic economic tells us that if the supply increases, prices will fall down. Thus, imported agricultural commodities from Ukraine are now cheaper than the EU commodities. People will naturally buy cheaper products, and those were from Ukraine. That upset the EU farmer. This apart, many trade agreements with New Zealand and Canada have made imports cheaper. There is another ongoing trade deal with Latin American countries group called Mercosur that is getting more backlash as it will make imports even cheaper and that will impact domestic producers. This is again a classic economics bargain or a trade off. Whom should the government support? An open trade or domestic producers? If it wants to support domestic producers or farmers, then it will have to discourage international trade either by increasing import duties or imposing a price cap on domestic commodities such that imports become more expensive than domestic produce. Both can have negative impact on the economy. These trade agreements are in a way against their own principles. However, whenever the governments have tried to support domestic producers by imposing either of these mechanisms, it has not benefited the domestic producer. Then, the next reason is low prices for outputs or low sales prices. The United Federation of Breeders and Farmers Group argues that if we do not get adequate financial gain, how can you expect us to change our practices? Here, the problem is that farmers are not getting good prices for their output. But on the other hand, there is inflation. That means grocery bills for consumers have increased. Ideally, when there is an overall increase in prices, everyone in the supply chain should get benefited. But with the rise in grocery bills, there was no rise in incomes for farmers. All the margin or the difference was pocketed by supermarkets and food processing companies. An article in Deem25 states a farmer sells his beef for 3 euros per kg, but in stores you have to pay 10 euros per kg for ground beef, or even more. Someone is getting rich from this, but it is not the farmers. And in the 2 years, the price of milk has increased by 30% in stores, but farmers have not seen their income increase by 30%. It is the agri-food multinationals that benefit from it. Next reason is subsidy reversals. Due to rising fuel prices and general inflation, some countries have introduced agricultural diesel subsidies. Diesel is an environmentally harmful product, and subsidizing it would mean that the government is encouraging pollution. Therefore, many countries around the world are rethinking this strategy. In the case of agricultural diesel subsidies in Europe, many countries have started reversing them. That would increase the cost to farmers. And right now, farmers are operating at a very low margin, and thus, any kind of increase in costs will impact their livelihood. Another issue with EU subsidies and CAP in general is that rich farmers get more benefits than small farmers. 80% of the scheme's money goes to just 20% of the farmers. Now, the last reason is climate change and war. Russia-Ukraine war has increased the price of all inputs, right from energy, seeds, raw materials, and all the necessities. Then, climate change has added to complications. Some places have witnessed drought, while some have witnessed floods. That has made agriculture even more problematic. Small farmers have been hit harder than rich farmers. So, in general, things have got more complicated and have impacted farmers' lives. These are some common reasons of protests. However, every country has different reasons. This is the table that lists country-wise different reasons why farmers are protesting. Even though economy will be impacted because of these protests, politics is going to change. Right-wing politicians are riding on farmers' problems right now. they are also Eurosceptics, which means they do not support the EU as a concept and want to separate like what Britain did a few years ago. I had made an episode on Brexit and you can check that out after watching this. It is predicted that in the upcoming EU elections, right wing political parties will gain more seats. Plus, overall, many European countries will see an inclination towards right wing politics. Now, let us come to India. Indian farmers are protesting for these reasons. First, farmers want MSP in some legal form. MSP is minimum support price. Government guarantees a minimum price for a few commodities and that is usually above the cost to the farmer. But even if that is guaranteed support price, government does not pay them in reality. Therefore, farmers want that there has to be some law that will mandate the government to pay this price. This is a fair ask, but in general, the concept of MSP is problematic at core. Second, farmers also want the government to withdraw cases registered during the last agitation in 2020-2021. It is a sort of weird thing that to demand withdrawal of protest-related cases, the farmers have to protest one more time. Third, they also want pensions for farmers, loan waivers, and withdrawal from World Trade Organization. This is not economically conducive demand. Pensions can be thought of, but loan waivers and withdrawal from WTO are not at all fair demand. Not from economic point of view, but also from political point of view. Fourth, the farmers also want the government to honor a promise to double their incomes, complaining that costs of cultivation have jumped over the past few years while incomes have stagnated, making farming a loss-making enterprise. This is a fair argument per se, but for that, the agricultural markets need to be more reflective of demand and supply situations in the economy. For that, MSP has to go. For that, some good aspects about the farm laws that the government wanted to implement has to come. Agriculture should behave like any other industry. Number of people in agriculture needs to go down, but for that, overall economic performance need to improve too. So this is a structural thing and it will be more difficult to reform the agricultural sector without a proactive and modern approach towards it. I had written an article on new farm laws. I would recommend you to read it once you are done watching this episode. So currently, Europe does not have MSP kind of thing, but they want it now. India has MSP, but it is not implemented properly. But farmers want it in law. And I believe this is the most important problem for all farmers around the world, and that is not getting compensated enough. Excessive regulations have worsened the situation. In Europe, decentralization is necessary. In India, core reforms are necessary. The strange thing is the protest in Europe benefit right-wing politicians, while in India, they benefit left-wing. The common outcry, at least in Europe, is that the leaders have lost touch with what's happening on the ground. They largely cater to large corporations. In India, government intervention in this sector itself has been the most problematic thing and has kept the agriculture poorer. I would recommend you to listen to episodes 186, 140 and 211 of The Seen and the Unseen podcast by Amit Verma. You will find loads of information regarding why India's agriculture is in the place where it is today. The struggle of farmers or peasants is not new. It has been here for many centuries. Karl Marx has written a lot about it and he blamed capitalism. But over-control by the government has also been a problem as witnessed by many countries including India. Finding out the perfect answer is a tough job, but leaders can at least listen to the problems they face and try to find out the least problematic way out of the current situation. That's it for this episode, guys. See you next week with another interesting topic. Thank you.